This video will be an introduction to using materials in Maya. A material is a color or an image or a video placed on top of your 3D geometry. So I have in this example, I have 4 different spheres, and they all have the default material, which we'll talk about in a second, and a plane underneath, which is a flat surface, and that also has the plane material. So if I render this, it looks like that. We're also in software rendering, which we'll talk about, and I want to put a different material on each of these spheres so that you can see some of the possibilities you have with Maya. So let's start by, over here on your left side, these bottom ones, we can change these to be whatever set of windows or panels that we want. I'm going to right click on the second one and choose Hypershade Perspective, which is Hypershade/Persp. And when I click on that, now that one should stay as Hypershade Perspective. Even if I come back up here where it's my single perspective view, now I have that. This is my Hypershader. It's going to be a lot smaller than it is on your screen. And here is my perspective view, and the attributes we'll talk about in a second. So I'm going to delete that one. So when you begin a new Maya project, it automatically creates a Lambert. A Lambert is a material that doesn't, it's matte. It doesn't have any shininess. It's really flat. It doesn't take into account any reflections or specular highlights. It's just a nice flat material. And the default one is this one right here. It's called Lambert 1. If you make any changes to Lambert 1, then every new primitive or any other piece of geometry you bring into your Maya project will begin with that material. So it's better just to leave Lambert 1 alone and to create a new material. So in the browser you'll see examples of all the materials that we have. As we add new materials, they'll go into the browser and then we can apply them to our geometry. So some examples of ones that are really useful. This is in the Favorites Maya, so wherever you click here, it changes which ones are available. There are a lot. As you can see, if you scroll down through all of them, there are a bunch. I mostly deal with just a few of them. Lambert is the first option here. And if I click on Lambert here in my Create, you'll see that I'll get a new Lambert in my browser. Now I can change this Lambert to my specifications. And the way that I do that is if I double click on it, then it'll appear over here in my attributes. And I can change its name, so maybe I'll call this Sphere 1. It's a good idea to get into the habit of naming these so that you don't have to know which one Lambert 30 is. Underneath, I have some common material attributes, and these are things like color. So I can come here, click on this, and use my wheel and my mixing however I want to do it in my HSV or up here in my wheel, and I can choose different colors. So I can say I want it to be a green. I want it to have that, saturation, no saturation, I want it to be a green. Oh, that's a really ugly green. And now that Sphere 1 material is green. Now it hasn't changed anything in my perspective view yet because we have to apply the material to whatever geometry we want it to have. So in this case, if I choose here, there's a couple of different ways to do this. I think the easiest is if I hold down my middle mouse button over here on the thing in the browser, I can hold down my middle mouse and drag it onto that material. Another way I can do it is with this sphere selected, I can right click on the material and say assign material to selection. And the third way is I can right click on the object itself, and it's off the screen, but down at the bottom you can see assign existing material, and I can choose whatever one I want. So it just depends on your circumstances or whatever you prefer. All three of those work well with that. And now when I render this, you will see that that has a Lambert non-shiny material on it. Now there are a couple of other ones that are really useful. Blends, anisotropic, I don't know if that's how you pronounce that or not, Fongs, those are all shinier materials. So if I use a Fong, I'm going to create a new Fong, and I'll call this Sphere 2, and I'll go ahead and just drag it right onto that second sphere so that you can see the shininess that's associated with that. So now you can see a little bit of that highlight there that creates the illusion that that is a shiny material. Now there's a bunch of other things that I can change in here. Let me double click on my sphere again. I can adjust transparency. That is how opaque or not opaque an object is. Ambient color is how much it's affected by whatever ambient colors you have. You might have ambient lighting or other things that can affect that. Incandescent is how it'll appear to glow. It doesn't actually create light that will be that will affect other objects. It's just the illusion of that. So that's incandescence. There's a whole bunch of things here that you can mess with. Translucence. We have in special effects, you have a glow, which actually does create a light source, but you have to have it in a different rendering. And these are all different things that I can do with just very basic things. So if I make it into a yellow Phong, now I have a shiny material. Now I'm not limited to just basic colors. I can also apply images and videos as materials onto an object. So we're going to do today just an image, and I found one online here of the Earth, just a flat texture of the Earth, and I'll save this onto the desktop. And now I can apply that to the next one. So let's create another material. We have to, when we have an image, we have to put it onto one of our materials here. So I'm going to choose a Lambert again. So I'll choose another Lambert. I'll double click on that and make sure that that's called Earth instead so that I don't lose track of it. And you'll see that it's named in your browser like that. And now with color, instead of choosing a color here, I will click on this checkerboard box on the right side. These are my nodes. And when I click on this, these are all the different things I can put onto the object instead of just a color. There are different kind of textured materials. There's ocean. We'll probably mess with that one a little bit. Some of these I'm not a big fan of. The wood one I can never get to work right. But the one that I'm going to use now is file, because I want to find that file that I saved. So I'll click on File. And now I have file here in my attribute editor. It's looking for which file to use. And under image name, I can click on this folder and I can go and find that file, which was called Earth. And now when I apply that to this, it doesn't look like anything happened. It looks like it goofed up. The issue here is that Maya doesn't by default show you images as materials. For that to work, I have to press 6 on my keyboard to turn that on. And once I've done that, you will be able to see it in real time on your screen. And because it knows how to apply a texture to a round surface, it does a pretty good job for me already. And now I can click on my renderer and see that rendered. And I can place any image. Some of them aren't going to go onto that sphere especially well, but that's something that we'll deal with more later. I can even draw my own images using something called a UV map, which we'll talk about. But that is one option. Now, right now we are dealing with the software renderer. If I click on this clapper thing with the gear next to it, those are my render settings. And I can choose a more advanced renderer called Mental Ray. Mental Ray calculates actual rays of light, what they will do when being emitted from a source. So it may hit the sphere and most of the light bounces off, and that's what we perceive as blue. Maybe it'll create a reflection or pass through it with refraction like it does with glass. These are all things that can only be done in Mental Ray. And if you don't see Mental Ray as one of your options, you may have to come in here to Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Plugin Manager and turn on the plugin, which is Maya 2MR. Looks like Maya Tumor here. It's close to the bottom. And if you load that, then Mental Ray should be an option that's there for you. And now, with Mental Ray, now let me render it again. The render is going to take a lot longer because it has to calculate a lot more, but it's going to be a much nicer looking image. You'll see that I'm getting all sorts of reflections now. Let me back up a little bit here. Because my Blinn is such a reflective material, and I think I turned up some things on it too. Looks like a billiard ball now. Mental Ray gives us some extra materials that are really cool. And what I have to do to find those is scroll down over here. I wish this was a little bit bigger, but you should be able to scroll down in your Create tab until you find Mental Ray materials. And the one that I'm looking for, I think the easiest one to use, is this MIA Material X. And when I click on that, you should now see MIA Material X1 in there, and I can rename this to be whatever. But what I like about this texture, this only works in Mental Ray. If you apply this to something and you're still in Software Renderer, it won't render at all. You won't see it. and sometimes that is confusing, but it's because it's a mental ray specific material. And what I like about this is it has a bunch of presets. So if I click here on presets, and you may not be able to see this off the side of my screen, but it has presets like glass, chrome. Let me go ahead and put a chrome on. So I'm going to say replace it. So now that it's a chrome material, I'm going to put that on my last sphere here. Now these mental ray materials also won't really render in real time all that effectively, so you'll have to render it. To click that render tab to be able to see what it looks like, and that's my chrome. It's very shiny, it's very reflective. It's reflecting the bottom of that gray plane that looks really ugly right now. But there are a bunch of presets in there that we can use. I've got these glass ones. Let me try a glass. Now when I render it, oops, wrong button. And you'll notice the rendering takes a lot longer, but now we're getting glass with refractions and all sorts of cool things that are happening in there that it's figuring it out, and that's why the render takes longer. There are other ones here too, so if I preset, let's do copper. And there's just some really useful presets in there that you don't have to mess around with it. If you went through and slid all these sliders, you could figure out this material on your own or make your own materials, which is perfectly fine. But if you're looking for something that kind of looks coppery, then that's got a good base for you to start with anyway. And those are just some of the basic materials that you can use in Maya. I mean, there are about 1,000 sliders for each of these that you can change and make pretty much any kind of material that you want. Later on we'll talk about bump mapping, which creates the illusion of it having a texture or a roughness. The last thing that I want to do is I'm going to come back up here to Maya Surface and find the ocean shader. And I'm going to place on this plane that I've created the ocean shader, which is a really nice, simple to use, I'll go back to my big view here, ocean looking thing. And it's cool, it actually animates. So if I hit play here, you can see the waves animate, and there's a lot of sliders that you can change with that too. And that's just another material. There's some preset Maya materials that are really useful and can save you a lot of time. There are marbles and things like that. And now when I render this, you can see that a lot of my materials are reflecting that ocean bottom. And then the last thing that I want to do is to show you the sun and sky. So Mental Ray also includes some automatic lighting that we can set up. We can create our own lighting with there's point lights and spotlights and a lot of other lighting things that we can set up. The easiest way to set up at least a default lighting is to go back into your render settings and choose scene. And you'll see that in environment, right here in the middle, you have a physical sun and sky. When I click create, it will make right at 0, 0, 0, which is right in the middle of your origin grid there. There is a representation of the sky. Now these are arrows that designate where the sun is pointing, what time of day it is basically. Straight up and down is noon, and I can rotate it to change this. Flat would be dusk. And so you have everywhere from sunrise to sunset. If I set it like this, then the light will be coming from this direction, and it'll be closer to the evening, so it'll create more of a sunset thing. I might have to turn this up a little bit. And you can put this wherever you want. It doesn't really matter where it is. All that light is coming parallel from that direction everywhere. So you can resize it, and you can move it somewhere where it's really useful, and people won't see that. So now when I do this, let's see what it looks like. It's going to increase my rendering time again. I'll go ahead and pause it. Alright, that took about a minute to render, and you can see a lot of things that are happening here. You're seeing reflections from other materials, so that's something that is exclusive of Mental Ray, is that our lights are bouncing off of this green sphere and reflecting off of the reflective surface of that yellow one. I'm going to go ahead and change which direction this is going. So I'm clicking on E to be able to change it to rotation. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate it a little bit more, but I also want to send it the other way. I'm trying to get it to be like sunset. It's a little tough to gauge that, but I'm going to try rendering that again so you can see it one last time with the light coming from another direction. So that render was even longer, but you can see how quickly you can make something that looks like a 90s Windows screensaver. But then you can also use it to actually make cool things later. So that's the tutorial.